What's up, everyone? Welcome back to Conflicts of Interest. This is episode 72, and I'm the host of the show, Kyle Anzalone. Want to start off today's show real quick by talking about the Libertarian Institute. We have our 2021 fundraiser going on over at the Institute. They have some great kitbats right now. You can see the boots you could get with a $50 donation. Any one of Scott's books, enough already. Time to End the War on Terrorism, which I highly recommend. It's new out. In this book, Scott weaves the entire terror war narrative together. So if you already don't have a copy, get yourself a signed one, support the Institute. But you can also get Fool's Errand or The Great Ron Paul signed by Scott Horton. You could also get either a Sheldon's books or Will Grid's work. So there is a lot of possibilities of books you could get from the Institute. Of course, those are all books that have been published by the Institute. Just one day into the fundraiser, we're already well over 10% of the total goal. So this is going really well, and get on board, help support the Institute, libertarianinstitute.org/donate. Of course, I'm the news editor at the Libertarian Institute, and in that role, I produce this podcast and my daily news roundup. Both of those I think are pretty important works that I put together to try to help craft a libertarian narrative in the news. A lot of what ends up coming out from mainstream media outlets is already baked in with so many different lies and myths and propaganda, spin, half truths, and everything. And it's really hard to have a conversation starting from that point. So I try to get really into the hard news, and if I give a spin, it's gonna be the libertarian spin. So support this show, support the Libertarian Institute, libertarianinstitute.org/donate. All right. Other ways you could help the show is by sharing it. YouTube, Library, or Odyssey for the video version of the show. Of course, the video is embedded at the Libertarian Institute on the post I put up there. There's where you can find all the different show notes that I put together. And so libertarianinstitute.org, any of your favorite podcatchers, on Facebook, there's a conflicts of interest page. The Twitter account is at @con_interest. So anywhere you find the show, please give it a share, a likes, and try to put it out there to more people. The algorithms do not help this show. They're interested in putting CNN, The Hill, Fox News, any of those kind of outlets in people's faces. Washington Post, New York Times, all those people get all, everywhere on YouTube, Twitter, you'll find their stuff, but it's an independent media that has a hard time getting in people's feed. So the more people like, comment, and share stuff, the more it's going to get out there. And so that's a real way to help the show. The last thing I have to, start off with here is you could support the sponsor of the show itself, and that is Paloma Verde. PalomaVerdeStore.com sells great CBD products. Right now they have a special on their Edstrat that's going to be a pretty heavy dose of CBD, and it's combined with melatonin to help with insomnia. Co-host of the show, Will Porter, not here today, but if he was, he'd tell you about how it's been effective for him. So PalomaVerdeStore.com, use the promo code PEACE, and you could get a additional discount along with your free buy one get one free bottle of the melatonin extract. All right, let's get into the news. The first story I have here is from Reason, titled "Cops Arrest Mom Working Evening Shift at Pizza Place for Leaving Kids Ages 10 and 2 Alone." And so, this is a really difficult story, and I think Reason asked the right question in the sub-headline, which is that really helping? And so it seems like the mom in this story must be in a pretty tough place. She's in Ohio. She has 2 kids. She's working at a pizza place. Not that there's anything wrong with working at the pizza place, but it's not, probably not a high paying job. And she's also living at a motel. And so that suggests that she's at or near homeless. And, she's probably just scraping by enough money at this pizza place to keep paying the rent at the motel to make sure, her and her kids aren't out on the streets. And so there was a tip given to the Ohio police. They went to the motel room, and I guess, the 10-year-old was like, yeah, I'm here watching the 2-year-old. And then they went to the pizza shop where the mom worked, and they arrested the mom. Now, it's definitely not ideal that this mother is leaving her, young children home alone. But at the same time, it doesn't seem like she had a choice. If, the options for the kids are either to be home alone for 4 hours or to be with their mom all the time but be homeless, I think probably being alone for 4 hours is going to actually be a little safer. Homelessness is very dangerous. And so the mom working the shift, she was going to be home at 10 p.m. She says she had somebody stopping in every hour to check on them. I'm sure it's not an easy situation. I'm sure she doesn't enjoy being in this position. I believe the woman herself is 24 years old, so I mean, this is a young woman who it's probably difficult, for her to always figure out what the right choice in life to make is and everything too. And here the police come scoop her up and arrest her. And it's just so counterproductive to do this. Of course, now the mom has a criminal record. Maybe she loses her job. I mean, the police coming in and arresting one of your employees on 2 counts of child endangerment isn't necessarily a good look. Maybe people who don't know the details of this story want the woman to be fired because they're like, this woman's a child abuser, because that's kind of what it makes it sound like. Now, luckily, she was able to get out on bail. So many people in this position can't get bail, but also it means that she may have had to go through a bail bondsman. So now, on top of, her bail, she's going to have an additional charge on top of that. That's going to be really difficult for her to play. It's putting this woman and her children, who they're allegedly trying to protect because they're charging her with child endangerment. It's just, it's such a mess. And of course, the other thing people notice on stories like this too is there are cases like this where the police seem to overreact to, parents being in a difficult situation and end up putting, their children in difficult situations. And it's a bad story. It really is. You don't want this to happen. But then at the same time, there's ongoing stories of sexual abuse. There was just that school in Missouri that apparently decades they have been abusing kids, or things like Jeffrey Epstein, where you wonder how so much American police, force usage isn't even towards arresting people who are guilty of something, who are violent, but rather, just people who break silly regulations that, while they're not necessarily even making the worst decision. It's hard to say that anybody else would have made a different decision in that lady's case. But now she's in bail, and who knows what could happen. She's a single parent. She could end up losing her kids, or, it could hurt her in custody battles. Again, the criminal charge could look really bad on future employment or housing opportunities going forward. Again, she's living in a motel. So, that's kind of the situation here. And I, just want to highlight how terrible these little acts of policing are and how much they hurt American citizens. All right, the next story I have is a part of why, as a libertarian, I'm a little bit, opposed to the welfare system. Not necessarily that the first thing I'm interested in cutting, or really the last thing I would be interested in cutting in the U.S. government, is something like unemployment benefits. But yet the state really doesn't run welfare well. It's important to point out that, welfare is a failure because the state is a failure. And so there's this article from NPR that says states can forgive unemployment overpayments, but Missouri demands people pay up. And apparently the state of Missouri has this COVID thing happened, and all these additional people going on welfare overpaid to 46,000 Missourians their unemployment payments, and that's a total of $150 million. And so this one particular lady that's profiled owes the state apparently now $8,000. And you really wonder if you even help these people at all with offering these massive welfare programs, when now so many of them are indebted to the state, probably have so much more additional stress on their lives. And let me tell you something, the state will get that money back. I spent some years working with a lot of people who were on welfare and helping them navigate their welfare benefits. And there were people who had been overpaid by welfare for like 5 years, and now it was 15 years later, and the welfare office was still taking like 20 to 25% of their welfare check every month. And it just made sure that, like, not that you have a lot of chance to get out of poverty on welfare, but when the state is taking 25% of your welfare check for bad payments, you're definitely stuck in that poverty trap, and you really can't start to, build any money or buy anything nice, because uh, you're just like getting bare minimum subsistence and everything, and actually a lot less. And then, people in that position a lot of times have to rely on a lot of private charity and stuff like that, going to churches to get extra money, or gift cards to the grocery store, stuff like that. So the welfare doesn't work really well. Something I've been talking a lot about on the show has been the death of Capitol Police Officer Brian Sitnick, who, for the past month, it has been reported that he was killed. Oftentimes, they claim that he was bludgeoned to death, beaten to death, or they actually went with the story of he was hit with the fire extinguisher and killed that way by the pro-Trump mob at the Capitol. One of the things that his death really did is it changed the narrative, because then the mob wasn't just, unruly and, destroying offices and stealing some stuff from the Capitol. Not that they started any fires or, destroyed any old paintings. They didn't, burn the podium or anything crazy like that, but they did steal some stuff. They were definitely unruly. They were violent towards the police at times. But this really turned it and made it harder to not defend the Trump mob, but work against the threat inflation going on, saying this was an insurrection or a coup. And so we now have this update on the New York Times article that had reported that the Capitol Police officer had been murdered with a fire extinguisher, saying that update: new information has emerged regarding the death of the Capitol Police officer Brian Sitnick that questioned the initial cause of his death provided by officials close to the Capitol Police. So I have a couple problems with this. The first is the framing of it in general, which is that they had to wait this long to post this update. It was, skeptical pretty on. There was reporting within a few days by ProPublica saying that, he had talked to his, I believe, brother within a few hours of the, insurrection or the riot ending. And the brother said that Sitnick had told him that he was maced a few times but was otherwise fine. And so that would definitely throw a big doubt into the whole he was hit with the fire extinguisher narrative. And so they really probably could have gotten ahead of this story earlier, but they waited this long. And then they didn't even clarify that not only was, that initial narrative incorrect, but it now seems that it at least wasn't blunt force trauma that killed him. And so they probably should have gone further to say that, he wasn't killed by the mob. They are still investigating potentially whether it was something like pepper spray that could have killed Officer Sitnick, but it's unknown, and there's even speculation that he just had an unrelated stroke. Traumas and tragedies like that do happen. So, these are kind of the details now that are emerging on the case. I want to stick with the story in part because I've been skeptical about it all along, and when nobody was being skeptical. And so I want to make sure I keep up with this story and try to get to what actually happened at the Capitol. Now, one place you probably won't find the truth about what happened at the Capitol is in this new 9/11 style commission that House Speaker Nancy Pelosi says that she is starting, and is the next step in the Capitol breach investigation. It's very interesting. They've now gone to Capitol breach as kind of the slogan for this, where it was the sits one, or one sits in insurrection, the one sits coup. Of course, the interesting thing here is that I feel like she's almost feeding into like kind of some of the conspiracy, more minded people, the people who would be skeptical of what comes out in a 9/11 style commission, the people who are skeptical about the Warren report, stuff like that. And so she says she's going to undergo one of those. Of course, there's good reason to be skeptical if Nancy Pelosi is appointing the people that are going to look in and come up with this commission. I'm guessing that they're going to come to the conclusions that Nancy Pelosi wants to hear. So I don't think we're going to get the truth there, but it's probably going to be a lot of stuff we have to debunk in that report. The other thing I want to mention is that I believe, even though the impeachment of Trump has ended and he was acquitted, I believe there are 43 no votes, so they were a few short of what they needed to cross over. At 57 to 43, I think was the vote, with 7 Republicans crossing over. But the excuse for the continued deployment past the inauguration of National Guard's troops to the Capitol was that the impeachment trial was ongoing. Idris Ali, who is a reporter for Reuters, I believe he's their national security or Pentagon reporter, says that the number is going to cost around $500 million by mid-March, and so very concerning that we've had troops deployed there this long, and how much it is costing us as taxpayers. The last thing I have is just another quick narrative on the Capitol protests that I want to touch on, and that is the zip tie guy. And you still see this on social media a lot, saying that this guy who they photographed having zip ties in his hands, and they are the big ones that you would use, that cops will use to arrest people at a protest, and he did have those in the House, or I guess the Senate chamber. And a lot of people point to this and said, why would you have these unless you were going there to arrest people? But now it is apparently even stated by prosecutors that the young man who had these, he did break into the Capitol apparently with his mother, and they grabbed the zip ties so that the police couldn't use them. And while there are a lot of things that you could think about that, and I'm sure that's going to contribute to a charge of interfering with the duties of the Capitol Police, at the same time that goes against the narrative that this guy went in there with the intention of arresting congressmen to allow a coup to happen. And it's just another blow to that narrative. On Friday's show, I talked about this event that happened over the summer where 2 Buffalo police officers pushed an elderly man to the ground. I got the video playing here again, just in case anybody forgot about it. You can see it. 2 officers push him to the ground, and he, I believe has a fractured skull. The officers don't even stop to help him. They just walk right past like robots. It's the National Guard guys finally that look to provide some kind of aid to this old man who looks like he's dying, bleeding out from the back of his head. And I had talked about how it was very unfortunate that the grand jury decided not to prosecute these police officers because, that adds to, the impunity of how police officers act, what they think they could get away with and everything. And we have a good example of that here. This is an article from the Free Thought Project, and I am going to allow some of the footage to play here in the background for anybody watching. But I'll describe what happened. In the middle of the night, some armed men showed up with uniformed Buffalo police officers to a home, and they said that they had a warrant that they would show the homeowner after he was after they searched the home. In the very beginning, they have him outside without a shirt on. It's obviously cold. You can see some snow on the ground in the background, and the police officers go inside and search his home, where his wife and I believe daughter or one of his children are. And these people don't kind of go in like with their guns holstered. They have their shotguns out. They're looking around. They say they're looking for the guy's brother who jumped bail, and the homeowner says he's not there. The homeowner also has an above apartment, so he lives on the first floor. Second floor is an apartment, and you could see some footage of police officers moving through that apartment like they're on a night raid in Afghanistan. Well, I actually, sorry, I made a mistake there. That actually wasn't a police officer. There were only two uniformed police officers at the scene. You could see them on the video. They're standing outside. But there's another, I believe, 3 armed men, at least from what I can make out in the video. And those are not police officers or law enforcement of any kind, but rather bounty hunters. And so you have this crazy situation where you have a homeowner who, again, looking up in the middle of the night, he's outside in the cold. He sees 5 guys standing around with guns. 2 of them are armed uniformed police officers. He assumes that they're all police officers, and so he complies with their demands, because if you put up a fight against the police officers, there's a good chance that they're going to arrest you and claim that you are somehow interfering with police officers duty or not, resisting arrest, stuff like that. So in fact, the police officers must not have known who they were with, because you could actually hear them on the porch, on the security camera outside the home. And one of the police officers says to the other, "Do you know what agency these guys are with?" And so you have this event where police officers went with armed men to somebody's home to kick down his door and point guns as family. And then you had a reporter, show this footage and ask to the police chief in Buffalo what, he thought about all of this. And he basically said, well, the officers didn't, say that those are police officers. They didn't have to enter the home, so they acted appropriately. And it's a really crazy story, but I think it shows a lot about, where the rights of the people are in America today, and it's really concerning. Continuing with that, we have an article here from the Washington Post. The agency founded because of 9/11 is shifting its face to the threat of domestic terrorism. And the article just goes through, and there's a lot of threat inflation and stuff in the article, but it goes through and it says that the Department of Homeland Security is now going to focus more on internal domestic terrorism. I talked a lot about this on the show, but there is one angle I want to talk about that was a little bit different, and that ties to a recent episode, the Scott Horton show, and where they describe a event that happened where police unprovoked beat an old man at the VA hospital, but the police were unable to be held accountable because they were federal police officers. And so the Department of Homeland Security is going to be a federal police force. And if we're going to give them increased power in the United States, they better be able to be held accountable. But right here in this ruling, at least now in the Fifth Circuit of the United States, that officers cannot be held responsible even if the qualified immunity was not available, because it was a federal officer and not a state officer. So the Fifth Circuit Court says that qualified immunity, which is that police or state employees could get away with anything that isn't already stated to be something that police and federal employees are not allowed to do. So, if they beat a handcuffed suspect because that guy was mouthing off to him, unless there's a that specific case just like it, they get qualified immunity and get away with it. Prosecutors get the same thing. They make up evidence. They lie to people. They say, we have your blood on the knife that killed the woman. You're going to get the death penalty. But if you sign this confession right now, I'll agree to give you 5 years in prison. They've been yelling at you for 24 hours. You signed the confession. That prosecutor can't be charged with the crime for that. That's qualified immunity. So they're saying that even if they're not entitled to qualified immunity, you can't hold them accountable if they are a federal officer. And so, unleashing the Department of Homeland Security and all their federal officers into the United States and against all of us is scary enough, but the fact that they cannot be held responsible for any of their crimes, at least right now in the Fifth Circuit, which is Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi, which I'm guessing is where a lot of the alleged domestic terrorists, the people that they're going to call domestic terrorists are probably in those places. So I'm that's one of the more disturbing things going on right now. Let's move on. There's this blog post at antiwar.com by Eric Garris. Biden removes "We the People" petitioning from White House website. It seems that if you go to the White House website, the petitions.whitehouse.gov is the URL there, and you click on that, it ends up going and redirecting you back to the whitehouse.gov homepage. And if you go to any of the older petitions that were ongoing, and you go and click on those now, it redirects you again back to the White House homepage. These petitions are an important feature on the website. When Trump took it off, there was a media uproar and it went back on. I really haven't heard anything at all from the media. This write-up by Eric Garris is the only one I found so far, and so it's important that we get that feature back. The next story I have is from Courthouse News Service, titled "CIA Can Shield Records on Syrian Rebel Funding." And this is about a new court ruling that said the CIA can reject a public records request seeking information on U.S. payments to Syrian rebel forces because a tweet from former President Donald Trump didn't officially acknowledge the records exist. And so this is a FOIA request, I believe, by BuzzFeed and Jason Leopold. And yeah, sometimes he's terrible on stuff, but this time it seems like he was doing some important FOIA work. And this was a ruling from a D.C. court circuit judge that sided with the CIA, claiming that a tweet by President Trump, and I'll go ahead and read the tweet by Trump here. The Amazon Washington Post fabricated the facts on my ending massive, dangerous, and wasteful payments to Syrian rebels fighting Assad. And so what Trump is referring to is an article that attacked him for ending the Timber Sycamore payments, the support for the Sunni opposition to Assad, which, as predicted by Obama's director of national intelligence, led to the rise of the Islamic State. We're now trying to get the CIA documents on that, see who was paid, and the D.C. Circuit Court ruled that that tweet didn't acknowledge that program. Of course, that's completely ridiculous. One of the decent things that could have came out of the Trump administration is that, he was not as careful about his words. And so, government officials are generally aware of these policies that say, if if you officially acknowledge something in the public, if the president officially acknowledges something in the public, then the classification, you could ask for the FOIA and everything, and so that you could be a little bit more careful with words, where Trump is just kind of this brute who's not going to be as careful with his words, which could be bad in a lot of ways, but one of the good ways is he tweets something that says the Amazon Washington Post fabricate the facts on my massive, dangerous, and wasteful payments to the Syrian rebels fighting Assad. First of all, it was a great policy move by Trump, but at the same time, actually acknowledging that publicly was huge. And yet a D.C. Circuit judge prevented that. It was actually overturning a lower court's ruling in 2019 that the CIA was going to have to hand that over. The other thing that I thought was important here that I picked up was that the D.C. Circuit judges, there's 3 of them, and one of them was appointed by George H.W. Bush. So a president who was elected before I was alive appointed a judge here that, is now handing down extremely important rulings 30 something years later. It's absolutely an insane policy how much power some of these federal judges have and how long they get to sit on the bench. Maybe the most important story I have to talk about today is this one from Iraq, where one contractor was killed and one U.S. service member was injured in a rocket attack. I believe 5 civilian contractors were also injured, and potentially other civilians were injured that were not associated with the U.S. military or forces. And I have this article here from CNN that does a write up on the story. There's not a whole lot of information known yet. It is believed that the one civilian contractor was killed was not American because they didn't identify him as an American. It could have been Iraqi. It could have been from any other country. I guess Iraqi would be pretty high on the list of a potential nationalities of the person that died. So the attack happened in Erbil, Iraq. That's in Iraqi Kurdistan. For those of you watching the video version, I have a map here. And Iraqi Kurdistan is the yellow section of the map. And to look a little closer at Iraqi Kurdistan, the main city there is Erbil. And I believe this happened outside the Erbil airport. I'm not quite sure how to describe it. It's pretty north central Iraq, south of the Turkish border, pretty far was at east of the Syrian border, maybe halfway between the Syrian and Iranian border in northern Iraq is a way to describe it. And so this attack was at least claimed by a newer group of Shi'ite Iraqis, Sarara Aliri al-Dam, and I'm probably butchering the name of that, but this group claims that they carried out the attack. About the only other thing I could find on this particular group was that they had carried out an attack in Basra, Iraq, which is all the way down in the south by Kuwait. And so I'm not sure what this group is. It's a new group. Of course, the Iran Hawks are claiming this was an Iranian attack on the U.S. and that we need to respond in accordance with how U.S. respond if, a uniformed officer of the IRGC shot the Iraqi contractor. As far as details of what happened, I think that's all we know at this point. Again, one contractor dead, one U.S. service member injured, 5 other contractors injured, and other civilians injured. Several rockets launched, claimed by this Shiite Iraqi group, SAD, I will say, for the initials there. The group itself put out a statement saying that it targeted the Americans and was trying to shoot at where the Americans were. This is certainly kind of an escalation from what we've seen from if this was an attack by Shiite militants in Iraq, it would be somewhat of an escalation. There was some talk of them holding off on attacking any American targets as long as the U.S. was planning on leaving Iraq. Of course, it doesn't seem like the U.S. is planning on leaving Iraq. Maybe they were, trying to say like, hey, Joe Biden, if you stay in Iraq, we're going to continue to target American forces. Not quite sure motivation message yet, but I one of the reasons I want to talk about it is because I think there's going to be a lot of pressure on Joe Biden to respond here. I've already seen from some of the Iran hots at the Hudson Institute that Antony Blinken's response to this was the U.S. was outraged by the rocket attack, and Michael P. Pregent said outraged isn't enough, and so he's saying that you have to have some kind of, I think, military response here. I really hope Biden doesn't go with a military response. He needs to try to get the U.S. back within the JCPOA. If he targets, specifically, if he targets Iranians or Iranian interests, in response here, it would be a huge mistake and undermine what he's trying to do with the JCPOA. Maybe there are limited options that he could do to try to hold the people who carried out the attack responsible. But I'm guessing that the Mr. Hudson Institute here wants a far more reaching response. So that's one part of that. The other thing I wanted to mention was, let's say a U.S. bomb had fallen on a house of Iraqi citizens and killed 3 and injured 4 or something like that. I'm pretty sure that none of these people would even want to hold anyone responsible for that. They would shrug their shoulders. They would probably blame Iran for ever doing anything that irritated America, so we feel like we need to bomb that house. But they would never be outraged. It's only because this contractor worked for the Americans does this guy care about the life of an Iraqi. And then here he's tweeting again, will we wake up to the Biden administration covering for Iran's militia attacks, who in the Biden administration is calling for a strong response? And so here, the Biden administration has condemned it, yet, he's acting very much like the Democrats did with Donald Trump related to Russia, where anytime some, Russia hawk accused Russia of doing anything, if Donald Trump didn't believe the Russia hawk at face value and go and confront Vladimir Putin on whatever they had alleged, he was covering for Russia. He was a Russia puppet. And so we could already see this forming within the Iran hawks and the Republicans. Also going on in Iraq is there was a 13 kidnapped Turkish citizens, I believe they were soldiers and police officers, were executed, or their bodies were found after being executed somewhere in Kurdish-controlled northern Iraq. Going back to the map of Iraqi Kurdistan, this area right along the border is not all one, homogenous Kurdish group. The ruling Iraqi Kurds aren't, I don't think, necessarily best friends with the Turkish Kurds, which is the PKK. They've been labeled a terrorist group by the State Department. They've certainly waged a counterinsurgency against the Turkish government and have, used terrorist attacks, killing civilians within that. And so here you have what seems like that group carrying out a war crime against Turkish soldiers. This has really upset the Turkish government that this happened. First of all, I'm guessing we're going to see a lot more Turkish airstrikes and military activity in northern Iraq in the coming days. This is going to increase tensions between Iraq and Turkey, who Iraq has long, sought to assert more sovereignty over their, geographic boundaries. And Turkey has kind of said that, no, we're going to have our forces in northern Iraq. The Iraqi state hasn't been strong enough to resist this, especially since the rise of ISIS. And so the Turkish soldiers have operated there. They've carried out airstrikes there. I'm not sure there's anything the Iraqis could do to stop it if Turkey goes ahead and carries out more military activities, but I'm thinking we're going to see that. Turkey is also condemning the U.S. for not making a strong enough statement in response. I believe they said there was no excuse for the executions, and Turkey said the response is a joke. I'm guessing Turkey is trying to push the Biden administration to maybe take some military action. So there's a lot of pressure being placed on Biden right now to take military action in Iraq. The solution for him is to get the American troops out of there. That way that pressure doesn't exist in the first place. Story from Jason Ditz at antiwar.com. The Taliban now control 52% of Afghanistan's territory, although the Afghan government still controls 59% of Afghans' population in their territory. And so it's, not a giant move. It's been around 50% for a couple of years now, but it is just another major flashing red sign that, hey, the Afghan government is losing this war, and that the US needs to start looking at a way out of this just huge mess and quagmire. Germany says that they are going to keep their troops in Iraq longer than planned. This story is from, I believe, the German outlet DW. And they say Germany says troops may stay longer in Afghanistan. The German military was set to withdraw in March, but the peace process in Afghanistan is not going as planned. This is somewhat true, it's somewhat not true. According to, I think, the letter of the US-Taliban agreement, the peace deal has more or less been upheld. To the extent that it hasn't, the U.S. and the Afghan government seems to have committed just about as many violations and is responsible for at least close to as much as the foot dragging on the negotiations as the Taliban are. So they're just blaming the Taliban for everything here. What they really want is this war to go on. NATO is saying that the Taliban haven't met their commitments, and so it's looking like NATO is going to extend their mission, and I'm guessing if NATO is extending their mission, Biden is going to go along with keeping U.S. troops in Afghanistan. The major risk here is there hasn't been a single American killed in Afghanistan in the past year. I think that's one of the maybe few achievements that you could really give Donald Trump is, hey, 2020. I think from February 2020 to February 2021, no dead Americans in Afghanistan. That is because of his peace deal. I mean, I don't give Trump credit for much. I think calling it a peace deal, that's what they called it, is propaganda, because it's not really set to bring peace between the Afghan government and the Taliban. However, it has brought some peace between the U.S. and the Taliban. And so if the Taliban are then going to step up attacks on Americans, it could be a not so great coming year for American soldiers if we go back on the peace deal and decide not to withdraw from Afghanistan. So the decision not to leave the peace deal is in part going to be, or not to leave Afghanistan in accordance with the peace deal, is in part going to be justified by this Afghan Study Group report. And there's an article out by Responsible Statecraft by Eli Clifton titled Weapons Biz Bankrolls Experts Pushing to Extend Afghan War. And so what, Eli Clifton here did is just look a little bit below the surface and say, hey, they came up with this Afghan study report that says we had to stay in Afghanistan. Who wrote that report? There's 3 co-leaders of the report, and then there's 9 members. 2 of the 3 co-leaders and 9 of the members, those 11 people together, have received $4 million from the military-industrial complex. Well, just the weapons makers alone. Co-chair of the group, General Dunford, holds nearly $300,000 worth of Lockheed stock, and he is on the board of Lockheed Martin. Co-chair, so this is 2 of the 3 co-chairs, former New Hampshire Senator Kelly Ayotte, sits on the board BAE Systems and has made several $100,000 herself. Member of the report, Susan Gordon, was paid $26,000 by weapons maker CACI and owns $160,000 of the company's stock. Stephen Hadley, who his name may sound familiar, he's the one who put the yellow cake lie into the 2003 State of the Union. So he was key in helping to ramp up the war between the U.S. and Iraq on false pretenses. So, this is definitely not a guy you want writing on a report to keep the U.S. in more war. When in the past he's gotten intelligence so wrong, he, helped lie the U.S. into our biggest debacle in the past couple of decades, the Iraq War. In 2005, he was the National Security Advisor, and he also promoted the Iraq Surge. So guess what he's going to propose here? He joined Raytheon's board after he retired from the government, and in his years at Raytheon has made $2.4 million in cash and stocks. Margaret O'Sullivan also serves on the board of Raytheon and has made nearly $1 million herself. Former Senator Joe Donnelly is a partner at the Atkins Group, and he was paid, and that group was paid nearly $250,000 by Raytheon for lobbying. So he wasn't paid directly by Atkins Group, but the business he's a partner at with did receive $250,000 from there. Of course, then there is Michelle Flournoy, who is the co-founder of West End Zets, and she's done past contracting work with Boeing. I talked about West End Zets a lot on the show, and their deep ties to the military-industrial process, military-industrial complex. And then also we have Lisa Monaco, who was a principal at West End Zets, so I'm sure I'm a Michelle Flournoy loyalist. The other members of the group of that's 11 of the 12 people, and then the other members include Mark Green, who is at the McCain Institute, and James Dobbins, who is at the Rand Corporation, which of course are both deeply embedded with the military industrial complex as well. And so if you go through and you look at all the people who actually put together this Afghan study, then it's no surprise at all they say more war, because that's always what these people propose. And it's because, to be honest, that's the positions that they're paid to hold. Look at how much money the military industrial complex and weapons makers give them. Some other news I have to talk about. An exclusive story from Reuters. Russia is in prisoner swap talks with the U.S. over detained Americans. And I think the main person here is Paul Whelan, who seems, at least from his story, he is suggesting that he was essentially wrapped up in some kind of, the old Will Smith Enemy of the State movie debacle, where he was accidentally given classified information. That's kind of his claim. He says he was just in Russia for a wedding. I have no idea what the truth of the whole thing is. He's now in a Russian jail. If the U.S. could get him out, probably shouldn't be in a Russian jail. It seems pretty terrible to be in a Russian jail. And potentially a prisoner swap could be a good way to build some trust between the U.S. and Russia. Sounds like good news to me. One of the good things about this is Biden is now president, and so there's not an insane amount of political pressure against having some kind of positive relations with Russia. That they're no longer saying Biden or Trump is owned by Putin. They're not saying that Biden is owned by Putin, and so if that allows the U.S. and Russia to reconcile relations a little bit more, sounds like this could be a positive. On the last episode of the show with Will Porter, we talked about the alliance the U.S. was building in the South China Sea and with Japan, India, Australia, as well as other Indo-Pacific countries like the Philippines to counter China. There's this very interesting story on Reuters here about the Philippines and the status of the U.S. Visiting Forces Agreement, which the U.S., I guess, is looking to extend. And the Philippines is saying that they want military aid that amounts to more than loose change compared to other Asian countries. And if you look at the details of what the statement was, is that the Philippines from 2002 to 2017 have received $3.9 billion in U.S. counterterrorism support, where Pakistan has received $16.4 billion during that same time period. And so they've gotten $4 billion and they're calling it loose change. So, this is one of those times where I don't know if Trump would have been the president that you would hope he be, but where you hope he pick up the phone and, he would tell him, get lost. We're not going to give you more money. We gave you $4 billion and you insult that. Like, forget you. The other issue with increasing aid would be that the current leader of the Philippines, Duarte, is pretty much a man and waging a pretty nasty drug war against his own people. So we certainly don't want to give him more money for weapons because he'll turn them inward probably more than against China. So I hope the Biden administration really doesn't buy into this. But if they do, we could start off, I think, with a pretty dangerous Philippines policy here. This is a pretty disgusting story that I have next from Reuters. The title is Palestinians accuse Israel of preventing COVID-19 vaccination transfers to Gaza. Israel admits to this. So what it says in the story is the Palestinian Authority accused Israel Monday of holding up the delivery of COVID-19 vaccinations into Gaza, where Palestinians are yet to receive any doses. So, we're a year into the pandemic, right? Palestine, Gaza, that area of Palestine, not a single vaccination has made it in. A Palestinian official told Reuters that the PA tried to send 2,000 doses of Russia's Sputnik 5 vaccine from the occupied West Bank to Gaza on Monday, but Israel stopped the shipment at a checkpoint and informed the Palestinians there was no approval to continue to Gaza. An Israeli security official said the PA's request to send 2,000 doses was still being examined and that approval hasn't been given. So, the headline of the story is all wrong. Israel is preventing Palestine from getting any vaccinations into Gaza. If this was almost anywhere else on earth, people would be in an absolute uproar over this, that you would have a population of 2 million people essentially living in a refugee camp. They don't have enough ventilators. I think they had a couple dozen ventilators at the start of all of this. They can't even meet the healthcare needs that they already have, just, based on the fact that most people don't have jobs. There's a lot of poverty. Israel bombs a lot of the infrastructure. It doesn't allow the infrastructure to be rebuilt. All that stuff going on contributes to the dismal living situation and the standard of living already being so low in Gaza. In fact, the UN had long predicted that in 2020 Gaza would essentially become unlivable, and here in 2021 you're having Israel not even allow the Palestinians to bring in 2,000 doses of the vaccine. It's absolutely unacceptable. There should be international outrage at this, and yet they kind of whitewash it in the headlines by saying, oh, it's just a Palestinian accusation. And of course, this is the kind of case where everybody's just fine with saying that, oh yeah, we believe Israel over Palestine. They kind of are sure that the Palestinians are the bad people in this case, and so they move on from the story. But in reality, the Israelis are depriving the Palestinians of vaccines. Next up, the U.S. is to lift its terrorist designation of Yemen's Houthis on February 16th, which is the day I'm recording this. It'll actually be the day before the show releases. Good news that the designation is coming off. I'm not sure why it took an additional week. I've already talked about the impact of this and why it's important that the designation is being lifted. That is going to allow aid groups to, not worry about running afoul of U.S. sanctions. Also, I believe it's the World Bank had estimated that 10% of Yemenis rely on remittance, and that remittance were going to be heavily cut by the foreign terrorist organization label on the Houthis and the sanctions that come along with it. So this designation being removed is great. The bad news on Yemen, this story from the AP, UN, over 2 million Yemeni children may starve in 2021. It's really as bad as it sounds. More than 2 million Yemeni children under the age of 5 are expected to endure acute malnutrition in 2021. 4 UN agencies said on Friday. The UN report warned that nearly 1 in 6 of those kids, 400,000 of the 2.3 million, were at risk of death due to severe acute malnutrition this year, a significant increase from last year's estimate. So they're estimating that in this coming year, 400,000 Yemeni children are going to die from starving to death. This isn't like there's just a famine going on, that there's no infrastructure there. This, it has been inflicted on the Yemeni people by the Saudi, US, UK, Emirati war that's been going on in that country for 6 years now. Every single one of these children is a human life. If I'm sure almost everybody either has like a kid or is related, or is has a friend that has a young child, and how much that child means to them, and what they would do to feed and make sure their child doesn't starve to death, and understand that this is going to happen to at least, they're estimating 400,000 Yemeni children in the next year. It's absolutely horrific. Scott Horton had tweeted out today, the director of the Libertarian Institute, editorial director of antiwar.com. I guess he had a recent conversation with Yemeni reporter Nasser Arabi, who, said, the Yemenis are people. It's just so striking that you had to say that every one of these children is a person, and it's a child that the U.S. government has starved to death. We knew when we got into this conflict that was going to starve children to death, and we haven't cared. Now, through at least two administrations, Obama and Trump, and Biden is, pretty slowly walking towards making any improvements on this policy. Couple of Iran stories here before we wrap. This one by Dave DeCamp at antiwar.com. Tehran condemns the U.S. attempt to steal Iranian oil as an act of piracy. The U.S., I believe, took this ship that they claim was a Liberian flagged tanker, but they say that it at some point was given oil from the Iranian state. So they say it's sanctioned, they seized it, and now they're actually going to steal the oil off the ships. Iran says, that the oil was owned by the private sector, and that it doesn't belong to them, but it's pretty disturbing that the real pirates in the world right now are the American Treasury Department and Pentagon. Iran says it's ready to limit nuclear inspections if the U.S. fails to lift sanctions. This again by Dave DeCamp at antiwar.com. On Monday, Iran said it would be obliged to limit inspections of its nuclear program by the IAEA if it does not receive sanctions relief by February 21st. Bad news for the Iranians. I don't think in the next 5 days Joe Biden's going to change his mind and lift sanctions. Now, I'm sure the Iranians will give themselves plenty of wiggle room, and that if the U.S. starts engaging in meaningful discussions with the Iranians, they won't blot the inspections. However, the U.S. acting in the next 5 days right now seems unlikely, especially again with all the pressure that we're going to see from the Houthis in the coming days on Iran just attacked us in Iraq. We can't talk to them right now. So this, could be a dangerous step. The Iran foreign minister spokesman said the government would be required by law to stop voluntarily implementing the additional protocol, which gave the IAEA additional authority for inspections. And so I guess they're saying that, again, they signed this deal with the United States, the JCPOA, which was an additional safeguards, inspection, and essentially limitations on Iran's nuclear energy program to give the Americans extra assurance that Iran wasn't secretly having a clandestine nuclear weapons program. So they've agreed to additional inspections, and in exchange for those additional inspections and caps on their nuclear program, their nuclear energy program, the U.S. agreed to lift sanctions on Iran. Now, in 2018, Trump, on his own, got out of the nuclear deal, even though by every measure the Iranians were abiding by the deal. So the U.S. then broke the deal. The Iranians now have been walking and taking steps out of the deal without completely withdrawing from it, hoping that the U.S. would get back in. But it doesn't make sense for Iran to remain in a deal when the other party has already left it. So I think that's, kind of where the Iranians are coming from at this point by getting rid of another measure from the JCPOA. Again, this could be prevented. The Biden administration could quickly work to start to repair U.S. ties with Iran. They could lift sanctions on Iran. They could come back with, propose some kind of step by step. We'll lift sanctions on the steel sector. Iran then is, now going to stop enriching uranium to bat down. They're only going to go up to 5% or something like that. Those are the kind of steps that, the U.S. could be engaging in, or just unilaterally lifting sanctions and then asking Iran to come back to the deal and hoping that after you broke the deal, the other party will be more, trusting and could commit to the deal. So, that's where we're at on the Iran policy. Again, the big concern does come from the attack that killed the contractor, and the Houthis are just screaming for Iranian blood right now. So we'll keep an eye on that. I'll continue to talk about that situation and the importance of getting back within the JCPOA and normalizing some kind of relations with Iran. All right, everybody. Thanks so much for tuning into the show. Check it out at the Libertarian Institute, where we have our 2021 fundraiser going on right now. That is libertarianinstitute.org/donate. Share the show at YouTube, Library, Odyssey, wherever you listen to podcasts, Facebook, conflicts of interest, Twitter at con_interest. Donate to the show itself. Subscribe star, links to the Bitcoin and Bitcoin Cash are in the show notes page. You can also donate on Patreon and support the sponsor of the show, Paloma Verde. Thanks, everyone.